Hello, YouTube. This is Natty, and I'm going live. So like I started already, I am going to be doing some regular live hangouts. I've done a couple already where I was talking about how I think that the internet and the world, I guess, needs to see more women who are non-feminist, anti-feminist, who genuinely reject feminism, and just women who their authentic everyday lives. And I've already explained that in a previous video. And so my baby's sleeping, and he's probably going to wake up soon, maybe in an hour. But let's hope it's not too soon. And the reason I wanted to do some of these hangouts and these live chats really is just because I do a lot of stuff in the UK online and in real life to try and support the men's rights cause, and call out feminism for what it is, try and recruit women to actively exploring and having a look at why it's so toxic and why it's toxic to society. I'm married with 2 kids. My oldest is 3 and my son is 8 months, and I literally have no time. So I try to do these things at the same time. So just, I think in the future, I'll get my kind of, little thumbnails with details about me if you don't know who I am. But I tweet at Ladies for Philip Davies, which is Ladies for PD. Philip Davies is an MP in the UK who supports men's issues and also has spoken out against feminism. I also have a Facebook page called Ladies Philip Davies. I run the Erin Pizzey Foundation Facebook page because she's going to be doing setting up a foundation in the near future to archive her work. If you don't know who Erin Pizzey is, have a look. And I was part of a group of women called the Liberty Bells. We kind of disbanded, but I still work with Elizabeth Hobson, who is the Director of Communications for Justice for Men and Boys. Me and her and 2 other people organise an event called Messages for Men, which happens on International Men's Day the last 2 years. So hopefully this year we'll be doing it again. Just getting all that out of the way. I'm sure as I keep doing this, I won't keep reintroducing myself. But the point of this stream today is just to tell you who I am, because, I have a project that I'm promoting, but I'm also very much interested in doing a kind of, what would you call it? Mummy blog, vlog, / showing what it's really like with being non-feminist woman who has kids, what everyday life is like. So something that sparked this off, and then I will go into more about me so you can get to know me a bit, because I'm quite happy to reveal my personal story online. I have done on Facebook and things, and other videos I've spoken a lot. So I have officially doxed myself. I'm also on the hate list. Hope not hate, don't like me. So, I also think that my story will help a lot of people. I think that Stefan Molyneux's call-in style shows are really, really inspired me, because he lays it all out on the table, where he basically tries to get every single caller to heighten their sense of personal agency and take action in their lives. And when I found him, I was actively trying to do that myself, and I kept finding that basically it's hard to get support with people who really truly understand what it is that you're trying to do, because most people have very little personal agency. And being an anti-feminist, a non-feminist person, is mostly about improving your sense of agency and taking agency and acting on it and taking responsibility for yourself. All forms of kind of progressive lefty ideology is about removing personal agency. There is obviously this idea that you have to submit to the collective mindset. Now, this idea that you're not an individual whose actions don't affect others, that is not necessarily what individualism should be about, but it can be promoted as that, like that. So there are some elements of this kind of collective mindset that I have sympathy for, because you do need to act as a collective, but the collective needs to be voluntarily negotiated, right? Not enforced by the state or violence. Anyway, so that is where I'm coming from. And yesterday, I'm going to give you a story that sparked off this thought about agency, and then I'm going to tell my story, just because I want people to know exactly where I've come from, and I want it to hopefully inspire others. I'm also with the Women's Liberation Network, which I've put as the thumbnail, and I put the link below. That is what we're going to be working on, will be to increase agency in our lives. And you cannot be a person. My argument is that you cannot be personally responsible and have full accountability and agency in yourself and with others if you are a feminist. Okay, this is not possible. But I'm always going to keep bringing up why feminism reduces agency constantly, whilst I'm also showing what it's like, the realities of living with little kids and a husband. Right, so this is what happened to me yesterday. Okay, without revealing too many details, because even though I've doxed myself, I don't want people knowing exactly where I live. But it doesn't matter, because we're moving, which I will talk about in the future. Right, so basically I live in London, and my daughter goes to a Steiner style kindergarten. Okay, and it's in a very, very nice park. I'm not going to go into detail about the park, but it's beautiful. It's managed very well. It's not just a random council managed park. Okay, it's managed by an organization. And the weather this week, even though it's February, has been 21 degrees in the middle of the day. I mean, the mornings are cold, but in the middle of the day, it's really been super hot, and there's no clouds, and the sun is really, really bright. So, I burped there. So it's now Wednesday, and after school, we've been hanging out in the park with the other mums and the other kids. And she's 3 years old, my daughter. And on Monday, we're sitting on the grass, hanging out, and there's a stream that goes through this park. And like in the summer, kids all jump in the stream. There's various parts of the stream. It leads to a river, actually, but like one of those small city-style rivers, and there's always kids paddling and swimming in it or whatever. And I guess she got inspired by that, and she just decided to take her clothes off. Okay, she's 3. She sometimes likes to try and take her brother's clothes off. Like, she likes doing that. So I was just like, oh, okay, cool. Like, I'm not going to let her be naked forever, but she wants to run around in this particular area, which is kind of like, nice. And there were some older kids under a tree, and they just freaked out about her being naked. And I was just like, okay. Their mum told them off, which was great, but they kept doing it eventually. And I said to her, look, Mia, you need to just back away from the older kids. They're not getting used to the fact that you're naked. Okay. And don't try and play with them. Because they were just like, some of them were just like, oh, that's so gross, blah, blah, blah. And instead of just like talking to her or maybe talking to me, they just kind of like were continuing going on. And I just went up to them and I said, when you were younger, do you think that you ever decided to just take your clothes off randomly? And they were like, yeah. And then they all went silent because, you know, I'm an adult and I'm a stranger. So obviously they were all like, and one girl who was the lead in it, kind of, she was just like, I don't know. And I was like, I think you probably did. I don't know if you were allowed to do that. Your parents might not have let you, but I think you probably did do that. So I just, you know, try and think about how you would feel if a bunch of older kids were grossed out by you for doing something that seemed very innocent. And they were just like, yeah, okay. And then they shut up, which is kind of what I wanted them to do. And then the next day, yesterday is Tuesday, and we're with, but by the way, on the Monday, there were other kids, but they'd sort of gone at that point that we knew. But then yesterday, we were with some other mums, and they, Mia did the same thing again. She decided to take her clothes off. Then there was this other little girl who's 5 and Mia's 3. She became obsessed with this act of taking off your clothes. She kept questioning me and Mia. She was going, why is Mia taking off her pants? Why is Mia naked? Why? And I was going to her, because she wants to, and it's hot. And I think she wants to go in the stream because there were some kids in the stream. And she was like, but I want her to put her pants on. And I was like, why do you want her to put her pants on? And she was like, I really want her to put her pants on. And I was like, well, I don't think she's going to. So, you know, and the thing is, my daughter's 3. So as much as she, you know, she can talk, her language skills are not to the level to have a conversation with this girl of the level that is required, I think. You know, the little girl could say something like, put on your pants. And Mia would go, no. But Mia wouldn't say, because blah, 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 blah. She's still kind of limited, especially compared to this girl. This girl's language skills were more advanced, right? So I just let them run off. And she said to Mia, you can't climb the tree, because it's like a tree they all climb, unless you put your pants on. And then Mia was like, no. And then she started like insisting, no, you can't do that. You really can't do that. Eventually she said it in a way that hurt Mia's feelings. And as I said, you know, I don't think Mia is at the level where she can sort of actively respond in a confident way. So she ran towards me and she started bursting into tears. And the little girl came running over, and I was like, what happened? She goes, and the other girl who's with them says, oh, you know, she can't, she told her she couldn't go in the tree. And then the little girl told me, I told her she can't go in the tree. And I was like, okay, but Mia's not really old enough to be able to argue that with you. She can't discuss that with you. So, you know, and also that's not very nice, right? At this point, Mia's like, oh, I need to put my pants on. And she came over and started trying to put her pants on. And I looked at her and I said, if you don't want to put your pants on, Mia, then don't put your pants on. And she was like, okay. I said, if you want to put them on, that's fine. But if you don't, that's fine too. But don't do it because she told you to, right? And then she decided to just stay naked, had a little hug and ran off. And then at that point, lots of other kids who were there, they were all decided they were going to go in the stream. All of them took their clothes off. Like a few minutes later, they all kind of went, fine, okay, and took their clothes off. Now, what does this story have to do with agency? Well, this story is basically Mia was given the choice by me whether or not she wanted to give into bullying, right, and remove her own agency, or take her agency, whether she wanted to put her pants on or not. Now, obviously, my interest in that is, I'm like, who is hell is this little brat telling my kids what to do? I mean, she's all right. She's just a little bit one of those kids that's going to be like the leader of the pack. Okay. You can tell right now. And her mum is fully aware of it as well. Her mum was there and she was talking to her daughter. But I made a decision in my head that if Mia put the pants on after I gave her this kind of option, then I have to live with it. I have to accept it. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, why should she give in? But she wants to, right? I have to make the decision within myself to be okay with whatever decision she makes, right? And that is me backing away as a parent, understanding what influence I have on my child, because children are always trying to please me. I'm her mother. She's my daughter. Yeah, she's always going to want to please me. So, you know, I have to actively say to her, you make the decision. I have to be okay with what the decision is. And so I've given her the right, I've facilitated it. I've said, here's your agency. You know, I think it's appropriate for you to make this decision. The rest of the story is kind of depressing, but I thought that part was important. After this, all the kids kind of got naked. Some of them were wearing pants and some of them weren't. And it was cool. They were all having fun. Eventually, someone who works at the park comes over and says, I've had a complaint. Would you mind telling your kids to put their pants on? This person was offended. This is what happens when you live in London. You know, the most intolerant person is going to be appeased. The mums are all like, oh, really? But because they don't want to put the school in a bad light, they're like, well, fine. But I know that most of them were just like not happy with that. So yeah, that was sad. But you know, this guy also said that they don't want to attract the wrong kind of viewers of naked kids who might think, oh, there's always naked kids here. I can come and sit down and watch them. Which, you know, is a fair point. Especially in a place like London where it's so many people, so anonymous. All right. So, yeah, that was my day yesterday. And hopefully my kids was all right with that. I was telling the story to my husband later on, and when I was telling it again, she was like getting more traumatized with the talking about the experience, because she found the experience with that little girl kind of upsetting, and then seemed proud that, you know, she did what she wanted to do within my guidance, I guess, right? You know, the other thing that's interesting is if I maybe had not given her that choice in the future, you know, she will either be very much not having a lot of agency, like a lot of people just following authority blindly and never thinking about it, why that might be. Because sometimes the rules are appropriate, but sometimes they're just there to please someone who is intolerant. It just depends on of others. It depends, right? But you've got to think critically about it. But she could also go the other way, where she might say, well, my mum always told me to do this, and I wanted to please her, and therefore, I must please others. And then she could play the victim, where she can say, I was just a victim because my mum wouldn't let me, and I'm that kind of thing, right? That can happen as a result of not facilitating the development of agency in your children. Anyway, so that's one thing that sparked me off thinking about agency. And I wanted to sort of tell my story and talk about how I kind of developed my own agency in my life, and still continue to try to do so, because I don't necessarily think that I'm always fully accountable and always fully responsible to, it is a, one second, I'm just posting my link, this stream. It is always a daily challenge. Okay. I'm just going to post it in another place, and then I'm going to keep chatting. Sorry for this lag. All right. So one of the things that I want to do is to do a kind of call-in style show. Not long ones, quite short ones, or at least short enough. Because that is kind of what we want to develop with the Women's Liberation Network, which I'll talk about later. But I think to do that, I have to demonstrate my integrity and how I've developed my agency in my life. So I'm going to talk about my life, basically. So I am from Southeast London, and how can we start? We start from the beginning. I'm 32 years old, and my parents are, I guess they're kind of typical baby boomer or younger baby boomer parents, who typical people that have moved to London, right? So my dad was from a working class background. His parents were from Yorkshire, Hull, Birmingham, and my mother's parents, they were from Northern Ireland and Jamaica. And I'd say that Ireland and Jamaica, because of the immigrant groups that came over in the 50s and 60s, that is quite a common mix. I've met loads of people that are half Irish and half Jamaican in parts of London and other urban areas, or places like Liverpool, that sort of thing, right? And so when they were, so my mum had me when she was 21, and my dad was 8 years older. Is he 8 years older? Wait a minute, was it 6? I'm going to count now. Yes, 8 years. I thought it was less. Right. And so they got together when my mum was about 19, and my dad would have been 27 or 26. Yeah. And so my dad and my mum both came from the care system, foster care, but slightly different stories on both sides. And they met because my dad was the chairman of a charity that was promoting the rights of children in foster care. And my mum was a volunteer for another charity group that was helping kids that were not white in foster care. And that's how they met, because they were both involved in that kind of thing, doing campaigning and being a bit of an activist, etc. They actually achieved success, this charity. They achieved a few, they actually got a few wins, and that's good. And it's safe to say that they are both lefty, of course. I mean, this was the 80s, and, you know, it was very popular to hate on Thatcher because everyone hates Thatcher. Or not everyone, but and so therefore they were definitely part of that crowd. And they were both abandoned children. They were both children whose families were severely dysfunctional. And, you know, in my mum's case, she was, her dad, my Jamaican granddad, came over 1960. Of a few other family members here, he became a bus driver. And then he got with my grandmother. She was like a nurse. Wait, was she a nurse at that time? She was, I can't remember what she was doing at that time, but whatever. But she was a nurse. And they were both living in London, get together, didn't get married. He was an abusive alcoholic, and she is, I would describe as simple. Like, literally simple. Possibly mentally retarded. I'm not entirely sure what this would officially be diagnosed with, because I don't know enough, actually. Because when my mum was a year old, she deserted her and went back to Northern Ireland, which in some ways you can understand when you have a kid with a black guy and you're white, which was obviously a big deal at the time, and you weren't married. And also you're mentally retarded. I don't know. I say that calling her mentally retarded would be removing too much of her agency, because she's not that way where she can't look after herself. It's just when you talk to her, she seems utterly just emotionally stunted and developmentally stunted. It's a strange. I really can't put my words on it, and one day I'll explain it properly. I'll have to maybe see her a few more times as well to kind of really gauge it, but there's something not quite there with her. So she goes back, she just leaves her 1-year-old child with an abusive alcoholic. Okay, so there's the attachment damage done to my mum instantly. My mum is taken into care because, you know, my granddad was on his own. And I mean, there were a few family members around, but I don't know all the details. But I know that she was taken into care. She lived with a lady who had a few kids in another part of the country. And then when she was about sort of 4, she then went back to live with her dad, who had a new wife. No, wait, he had a girlfriend. Sorry, the wife comes later. Anyway, eventually that woman left, and then he got with a single mum who was a widow, who also had mixed race kids, who had 2 daughters already, who were a few years older than my mum. No, wait, one of them was older, one of them slightly younger. There we go. And so this kind of family was, you know, instantly made. So she had a new stepmom. And my mother suffered a great deal of abuse from living with an abusive alcoholic. Also, he abused his wife. They all hated him. And It's very depressing, the whole thing. They were mixed race, living in poor conditions, I guess, and sucked, really. Their life sucked in that kind of way, right? When my mum was a teenager, she went to live with my other aunt, my great aunt, and she had a grown up kids, and I know that my mum was a difficult teenager, to put it mildly, explosive in anger and that kind of thing. So I know that, and then I know that that she got social housing after, when she was old enough, and then by the time she was 19, she was with my dad. My dad's story is also kind of depressing, extremely depressing. My grandparents they were from the north, right? That's not quite technically right. One was from Yorkshire, one was from Birmingham, which is kind of the north. But I always get mixed up when I say the north, because I'm from London, and people from the north go, "That's the Midlands. That's not the north." And I'm like, "Oh, sorry." So he was born premature, and I think, how old was my grandmother when she gave birth to him? Early 20s. I don't think she was as young as my mum. I think she was slightly older, but I'm not entirely sure. They were married, and my granddad was a train driver, and they come from a traditionally working class background. I know exactly what my background is, because I actually have a family tree, which has the details of occupations going back to the 1700s, which is very interesting. All of the occupations are just like blacksmith and labourer, carpenter, that kind of thing. And he went to grammar school, my granddad. His name is Sidney E. Parker. And the reason why I mention him is because he is a relatively well-known anarchist who wrote a journal, edited a journal, and archived other works of other anarchists from the 50s onwards until the 90s, where he became too old, I guess. He is now dead. He died in 2012. My grandmother is still alive. By the way, my mum's dad is dead, and my grandmother is still alive on that side. I never saw her until I was older. I don't have any relationship with her, really. But I did see my granddad a few times when I was younger. My mum tried to keep me away from him because he was always drunk, but I did see him. I do have memories of him. Anyway, so he he started off as an anarcho-communist. They moved to Notting Hill area, which at the time was very progressive, as in lots of communists and anti-establishment types lived there, and it was all very trendy and bohemian, right? And eventually he moved on from becoming an anarcho-communist to an individualist and egoist, inspired by Max Stirner. And he wrote, his journal was called Ego, -1. And he also had another one called Ego, and he contributed other essays and things to other places and archived lots of other people's work. He has a website called sydneyparker.com, which I'll talk about another time, but if you want to have a look, you can. Because someone's running it. Basically, my grandparents on my dad's side were anti-establishment anarchists who I guess wanted to just completely have some kind of revolution, or they wanted to reject a lot of what society had to offer, which I don't blame them. But they were, I guess, introverted, reclusive types. My grandmother had postnatal depression, and apparently she had depression prior to that. She used to have days on end where she couldn't get out of bed. I also know that she had terrible PMT, which when you're already depressed, it just becomes worse. Obviously, if you're a woman, you know what I'm talking about. And she was on medication like what's that medication called? Valium, etc. So, you know, picture a kind of, oh, well, she also wrote poetry. So, you know, Sylvia Plath type, basically very, very self-involved, but at the same time, probably utterly traumatized due to something, which I'm not entirely sure what, to be honest. And my granddad, Sidney Parker, I know that he went to grammar school, but then maybe he became disillusioned with the realities of middle class life, the you know how the class system. I'm not entirely sure what inspired him to become an anarchist, but he didn't follow a path of trying to become a professional. He stayed a train driver, moved to Notting Hill, and became an anarchist and a writer. So, you know, anyway, they had my dad. My dad was premature. My grandmother was postnatal depression and was already a depressive type. And I would say that actually I know that she has a personality disorder. I know that because she actually has been officially diagnosed with it. And I'm not entirely sure at what point this happened. I know my dad lived with them until he was a toddler, at least. And at one point, he was in foster care. And then another point, he was living with them. And then he was in a children's home. And in those days, sometimes they would send kids who were not wanted or whatever to boarding schools, and there would be some kind of way of paying for it, whether it was the government or a philanthropist type. There was a system where they would go to a boarding school. So my dad went to boarding school briefly, then lived with them again, and then by the time he was 11, he was just in a children's home. That was it. He never went back to his parents, and I think he saw them, but he never went to live with them. The details are not entirely clear, and my dad has told me numerous times stories and things, but there isn't a kind of solid, you know, timeline exactly of what, you know, why. It's there, but it's not solid, right? Anyway, so by the time and also my dad was dyslexic, so, you know, going to school for him was hard. And he was in children's homes. And by the time he was like 16, he was trained to be a chef for a while, but then eventually wasn't a chef anymore. And then he was working for this charity, and he met my mum. And he had social housing, so he had a flat in like East London, Old Street actually, which I joked with him 8 years ago that I said to him, if you'd have kept it, you would have sold it you could have sold it for a decent amount of money by now, although it wasn't an ugly tower block. But still, these days, hipsters will live anywhere as long as they're in Shoreditch or something. Anyway, so they meet, they get together. Now think about, I've just told you like a brief summary of their lives. They're two extremely traumatized and damaged people, and they're also trying to change things, which is natural when you come from the foster care system, and you're from, you know, in my dad's case, he has this kind of basis of being really kind of anti-establishment and wants to fight the man, and my mum had that sense too. This was the joining of that kind of energy, and also, I guess, the joining of the same kind of wounds. I mean, different, but the same wounds in the sense that they were unwanted children or abandoned children, right? So it was a powder keg. It was a bomb explosion waiting to happen, right? So this is where it gets hard for me, but I will keep it together because I really want people to understand where I'm coming from. if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to put myself online a lot more than I have in the past, then I think it's important that people know my story. So my mum had me when I was 21. She was training to be like a I think she did youth work or something, and she wanted to be a social worker. Surprise, surprise. And my dad was doing the charity thing and whatever, and then he got arrested for indecent exposure to a minor, to two girls who are aged like 13 or something. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically you're a man and you are taking your pants off and you are deliberately either masturbating in front of people. And in his case, it was to minors. So my mum obviously finds out, and of quite clearly, she is distraught because she has realised she's shacked up with a potential paedophile. And you know, I don't know how old I was exactly, but I was like I know I was over a year. And so they split up. I mean, wait, it's hard to get all, sometimes it's hard to remember some specific timelines and details, but I know that they didn't necessarily split up straight away, actually, but I know eventually they did. By the time I was 3 or 4 years old, my dad was not living in the house and he was living in a room down the road. And my mum and him had, to put it mildly, just the arguments were horrendous. And there was domestic violence. And it was sometimes initiated by my mum, sometimes initiated by my dad. And I know this because I saw it. You know, often it would be my mum going on and on and on at him. Quite clearly, she had something to be quite rightfully angry about. But then eventually she would get up in his face and just be so intrusive that he would lose his temper. And my dad has this kind of temper where he's very cold for a long time, and then he snaps. And in that moment where he snaps, you don't know what he could do. He can be, you know, it's scary. He's not someone that expresses their anger all the time and it bubbles up and you can see, or he's a hothead and it comes out. He's like a kind of like a flat line for a long time, and then suddenly after going through whatever he's been going through, eventually he just snaps, and then he's like this Jekyll and Hyde, right? Whereas my mum's a bit more hothead all the time. So, you know, she's angry about something, she loses her temper pretty quickly. Yeah, it was a horrible environment, to be honest. And I remember very, very clearly running into my room numerous times and saying, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to live in this home anymore. I don't want to be with this woman anymore. I don't want nothing. I want to leave. I remember that very clearly. And my dad got a suspended sentence. Obviously, he lost his job in the charity. And the psychologist who assessed him at the time said that he was not a paedophile. He obviously, but he is a sex offender, and that he has it's linked to a trauma from the past that he is reenacting, and it happens when he is really stressed. So remember I told you about how he's like a flat line and then something snaps, and then similar kind of behavior pattern, right? And but it's always to a minor of a certain, they have to be you know, a minor, not to adult women. And they also, so yeah, sorry, there's more to that. But basically, I guess what would you think would be the most healthy reaction to that as a woman? You would instantly say, this man is basically a danger to my child. What the fuck have I done? Quite clearly, I have a really bad picker. Why? But she didn't do that. Okay? She didn't do that. She kept him around. He used to take me to school. I used to see him all the time. They were like co-parenting. And she says that she had a codependent relationship with him, which is, I don't necessarily doubt that, right? But she didn't do certain things that I think a normal functional person, mother, would do, right? She didn't tell any of her family. And then she used to use it as a controlling mechanism to bash my dad around with. So she would be like, do this for me, or I'll tell X person, X person, X person, that person. Do that for me, or I'll tell everyone you're a paedophile. Right? Instead of, oh my God, I need to like just get away from this man. I need to go through the correct channels. Now, as I told you, it did come out from the psychologist's point of view that he, you know, he wasn't a paedophile. But like, I'm sorry, if it was me, I would be like, okay, this man is needs, until this man gets significant help. Like I you know, I need to go through the correct way. If he's going to see his daughter, like, just, she didn't do any of that. And she says she felt extremely embarrassed and guilty as well. And I understand that. But she did have two stepsisters who she was still close to, who I had two cousins. I used to see them all the time. She did have a few other people around who were very supportive. And I remember these people growing up. None of them knew, right? Until things got so bad between her and my dad, they used to argue all the time, that I started acting out at school. And there was an incident where I tried to stab a little kid in the eye with a pencil because they were kind of bullying me. But I'd never been that violent ever in my, ever. I was a bright kid and I liked school. But I started acting weird. Like, I'd start doing things that were just not normal for me. And then this kid's actually had a serious injury in his eye and he was bullying me. I remember he was like saying I couldn't have something and then running around. But instead of sort of just handling it in a way I might have done in the past, I just did that, and it was completely out of character. And the school obviously flagged that, and they knew how much of a fucking weirdo my mom was already. Okay. And so my mum actually came down to school, and she there was a meeting set up with the parents of the boy. And my mum turned up to this meeting, and then like they started a fight with her, or she started, I can't remember, but I remember seeing it from through the window. But to be fair to my mum, they had a baseball bat in his car, and then he brought it out. There's the mother and the father, and then my mum ended up taking the baseball bat from the man and tried to attack him with it. But my mum, from what I remember, my mum was the initiator of that aggression. They were quite clearly chavvy people. I know that much. But that always happened. And I lied to my mum, saying to her that I didn't do it because I was shit scared of her. But anyway, that she removed me from the school after that incident. And then obviously social services are called when that sort of thing happens anyway. And so social services were called, and then it all went downhill. And eventually social services obviously investigate both my parents, and they're like, quite these, what the fuck, like, you've got a sex offender and you've got this aggressive, my mum again also seems to have a personality disordered woman, right? And so, you know, after a long time, they didn't take me away instantly, but they did take me away. And they asked my mum to do numerous things, and she did refuse to cooperate with them. But they went to my dad and said, look, you know, she can't live with you because quite clearly we're not sure about you. And eventually they said, look, you kind of need to like cooperate with us, otherwise we're gonna consider other options. So my dad did, and that was probably one of the most traumatic experiences of my life, when my dad took me to a dance lesson, and instead of taking me to a dance lesson, he took me to a foster carer's house. Yeah. So anyway, I was 7 years old at that point. Yeah. And during that whole time I was with this foster carer, the social services investigated who I should live with. And there was my great aunt, who was kind of like the closest to a grandma. And there was my mum's sisters. And there was also, no, that was it, because my dad's friends, one had moved really far away, and the other one was a single man, and he wasn't really appropriate for a kid to live with. And so so basically the social services said, okay, you know, she should live with some family members. These three women were considered. And my mum, instead of going to her sisters and to her aunt and saying, look, my life is a complete mess, the father of my child is a sex offender, I really need help, she didn't do that. Instead of saying, you know, can you look after Natoya until I sort myself out? Nope. She harassed them. She intimidated them. She used to do anonymous phone calls. One time, my aunt got a call saying there was a bomb under her car, and this was around the same time this was all happening, and she's fairly convinced it was my mum. She wrote them threatening letters. And to this day, her response, if I asked her about it, is they had their issues. If I wasn't good enough to look after you, then basically no one can. Why should they get to look after you if I can't? Instead of, oh my God, I found myself, or I've put myself in this really fucked up situation, she said, I'm just going to let Natoya live with strangers. All right. And instead of people that she knows and loves. I mean, my sisters were, I know about some of the things that they went through. They were nowhere on the level that of fucked up that my mum's life was. Like, and there's probably stuff I don't know, but no, they all, like my mum's, the one that I'm thinking about, she is pretty stable. And even though her daughter is in rehab, but my point is that when it comes to like foster care, it is more traumatic to go and live with strangers than it is to live with your family members. And my great aunt would have been an appropriate carer. And she did have, she was unmarried, but she didn't really have a living husband or anything or her own kids, but she did have a support network where she lived. Anyway, so my mum destroyed the chances of me living with family members, and yeah, so I ended up living with this one woman for a bit, and then I went to another who had a few kids, and then I went to grown-up kids and a few foster kids, and then I went to this other woman who lived in this council estate, and she had 2 kids of her own and 3 kids, including me, who were fostered. That wasn't very nice, to be honest. I mean, she was okay, but there were a few things that happened in that time that would not have happened if I wasn't in foster care. And it was just, I just was existing rather than living, you know. Yeah. Anyway, so that was 2.5 years. And throughout that time, my mum caused a lot of problems. She had a mental breakdown, quite clearly. You can understand why. She was uncooperative in many ways. She attacked a social worker. Whereas my dad did everything they said. They put him through like 6 months of assessments and psychologists and things like that. And at the end of it, he came out looking like the better parent, and my mum looked like a crazy person. And to this day, she says things like, I think I was poisoned, or just before you went into care, we were really sick for a while, and I think you were poisoned. What? Really? There's a few other weird things that she said. She's just completely emotionally unstable, really, and a bully as well. She goes from this like extremely vulnerable person to being complete and utter authoritarian bully, and never is stable in the middle ever. So at the age of 9, on my 9th birthday, basically, my dad won full custody of me, and my mum lost her parental rights, which is extremely unusual to happen to a lot of parents, in male or female, but especially a mother. They said to my dad, you do everything we basically ask you to do. If not, she's going to be adopted because no other family members won't take her. And my dad said to me that he knew that he had issues, obviously, but he felt the only option, because if he didn't agree to that, then I would be adopted. And obviously he didn't want that. So, I probably wouldn't have been adopted, to be honest. I would have probably been in care for a long time because I was older, but we don't know. So I went to live with him, and he got a new flat. He got a flat. Because what had happened was he had a council flat in like another part of London, and then he gave that up to live in my mum's council flat, and then rented privately for a while, and then they basically gave him one, or he got one, because and so he got this new flat, and then I used to go and visit him, and then I went to live with him. And the social workers told me about his sex offending history. Right? They explained it to me. And they also told me that he was getting help with it. But I come to find out that didn't really happen. And when I went to live with him, I had 2 visits by a social worker in the 6 months, and that was it. He wasn't given any support whatsoever. He wasn't told, for you to have, the conditions are that if you live with, for your kid to live with you, you need to be in extensive therapy for a long time. No, that didn't happen. I have my social services records as well, right? So I know what the deal was, and that didn't happen, which is what should have happened. Anyway, I didn't see my mum for a year, and then eventually I bumped into her in the street, and I found out that she wasn't living very far away from me, because what happened to her is she moved house, because I guess the whole thing was traumatic enough. She decided to move house, and she got a better flat, because the council flat she was in wasn't very good. She got a better flat in a new area, still in South East London, but in a new area, a new council. And she had problems with her neighbours. She had problems with her neighbours so bad where she had fights with them in the street that she had to leave her flat for 6 months and live with this great aunt family member that she lived with when she was younger. And then it just so happened this aunt lived near me, and she was old at this point, really old. It was weird. And so I bumped into her a few times, and then I basically used to cry myself to sleep quite a lot. And I used to say, I want to see my mum. I quite clearly knew that my mum was mentally ill. My dad used to say to me, I'm not going to talk badly about your mum. You know that she's not well, and that's why you live with me. And if you want to see her, you can. So I said to my mum when I bumped into her in the street, I said, I'd like to see you. Can you please sort that out? She went back to court and she won visitation rights, supervised. And I was about 11 at this point. And I don't know, I said I had this spirit where I was just like, fuck that. I am not going to these contact centres to see my mum. I'm not doing that. And I literally said to her, I will come and see you at your house. And my dad was just like, okay, I will let that happen. And so I used to phone her with the house phone. And sometimes she used to phone me as well. And my dad would never talk to her. He would just pass me the phone. She would say, can I speak to Natoya? He'd go, okay. And he'd pass me the phone. That was like how it was. And I used to go see her, not every weekend, but most weekends on a Sunday. And then eventually I started to stay over because my secondary school wasn't far from her. And so I used to go to secondary school from her house on a Monday morning. And that went on for a while. But then as time went on, I started asking more questions about what happened when I was younger. She used to go into these massive, long, angry rants. And most of the time it was just really hard to have a conversation with her about things. I used to try to talk to my dad, and he just used to kind of be like, I don't want to talk about it, and give me these stock answers. Oh, and my dad offended again when I was like 12 to this girl who was my friend, who was older than me, who then I stopped being friends with because her brother was a bully and I didn't want to hang out. It was like hanging out with her was with her brother, and eventually I just kind of stopped hanging out there. And at that point, he offended to her. Well, she knocked on my door one day and did that, and she told me, and I knew about it because she told me, and I knew it was true because the social services had told me in the past that he'd done that. And instead of calling the police or at least whatever, I just kept it to myself, and I just told her that she was a liar and that was that, or whatever. Eventually she stopped coming around because she lived somewhere else. She stopped coming over because I wasn't friends with her anymore, and I never saw her again. And that was pretty traumatizing, to be honest. And I didn't tell my mum because my mum was crazy. I didn't want to live with her. I knew that living with her would be an absolute nightmare. And I knew that if I told social services that I would end up somewhere I didn't want to be. And my dad was just much preferable. And that was how it was. And he was always in this weird dissociated, depressed state quite a lot of the time. He didn't work for quite a while. And then eventually he used to run a market stall. Eventually he became a market stall holder selling records, and then he wasn't working for a while, and then he started working in a record shop again, and then eventually moved on to working for a bigger firm, a bigger company, but had a massive row, one of those days where, as I told you, he's flat lines, and then one day he snaps. He had one of those days, and got fired, basically, more or less. He left, but they said to him, if you do that again, we're going to fire you. And he went, fine, I'll leave. So, yeah. And so he was unemployed for a while, and he used to sell stuff on eBay. Yeah, so that's kind of what his existence was like. This kind of like below the poverty level, never quite saving any money or anything, just always being in charity shops and things, just poor and either on benefits or hardly earning any money, right? And I made a decision that I didn't want to live like that. I saw my mum, who was on incapacity benefit herself, because quite clearly she was incapable of getting out of bed in the morning without having some kind of problem, so some kind of drama. So I saw her and I saw him, and I don't know, I made a decision. I remember talking to her once, and I said, I'm going to go to university, and I'm going to own my own house eventually, and I'm going to just move on. I don't want to live like you two. I remember actually saying that to her, and she responded by being quite like, oh, that's good, whatever, because she was always quite ambitious for me. She had dreams of me going to this private school, like under scholarship or something, but whatever. She was obviously never going to get that done. Anyway, so I decided that I didn't want to be in this environment. And I think that when I was growing up, I think other people picked up on this attitude, because there was a bit of what's the word? Not jealousy. I don't think it's jealousy, because there was nothing to be jealous of exactly. It's like you're hanging out with the other kids in the area, and I was always like, thinking I want to be somewhere better than this, I guess. And I was ambitious in the sense that I just wanted to move on from this council estate and all that, and being in the area I grew up in. I just think that some of the kids sensed that, and I was called a kind of snob. I was called I thought I was better than people, and I wasn't a snob. Like, I wasn't like, oh, I think I'm better than. I was just kind of like, I don't know, always thinking, oh, I'd rather go to this nice place than over here. I don't know exactly, but there was a vibe, and I think people picked up on that vibe, and so I got picked on a lot by the kids in my area. Not only was I a new kid to the area, I wasn't, our family wasn't known. It was just me and my dad was living in this disassociated, depressed state a lot of the time, in his own world, collecting records, right? And, quite clearly other issues going on there. And then there's me, and just kind of fending for myself in an emotional way, because my dad did provide, as in like I was always fed, but and then I'm just sort of like, like, I don't know. There were some kids that were a bit like me as well, who I hung out with. So there were some boys on my estate who, one of them moved to Orpington eventually, his family, and that quite clearly they were never going to stay there. There was another one who's they were nice people, and they, I think he's a bus driver, and like moved to Kent and whatever. It's like everyone, I think, knew that staying where they were was not the path to a successful future, right? And this is a multicultural area in South East London, and things were just getting worse. So when I first moved around there, kids used to hang out, play rounders, families would sit on their doorsteps, and they would chill. And then as time went on, this changed. It just became more and more hostile. There was like teenage gangs who would come to our estate, even though we weren't their estate, and just cause problems, try and rob people or whatever, just hang out. There was, I remember it got so bad where there was this group of boys, this gang of boys. They started trying to use our stairwell to sexually assault girls. So they would bring girls to our stairwell and try and like rape them or force them into sexual activity. I remember hanging out with my friend who lived in a bit further away. And my dad called me, and I was about 14. So I had a mobile phone at this point. I think when mobile phones became a thing, I did have a mobile phone my dad gave me. And he called me and he was like, Latoya, please don't come home yet. Put me onto your friend's parents. I don't really want you to walk past what's going on. And I've called the police and we're going to wait until that happens. And I was like, what the fuck? And basically I knew who some of these boys were as well, because I was harassed by them too. Okay. And there was one boy, and this is one particular story, who when I was about 12, so I had a group of like friends who were like there were like 3 or 4 girls, and they lived on the estate across the road. Because the girls I became friends with when I first moved to my estate, some of them moved, the one that I told you about, but also they didn't like me. It was like the girls that lived there, they didn't like me. I don't know why exactly, but they were just always trying to pick on me. And then I made friends with some of the boys, but then the girls in my area were basically not across the road, but like there was like a mini park, and then they were over the other side, and they weren't very far away. And I made friends with like a group of like 3 girls who lived there. And basically I used to go to the park with them. We were quite active girls. Like we would ride our bikes and we liked running around and climbing trees and things. You know, we were quite well behaved and just not tomboys exactly, but we weren't like the typical girly girls. You know, my friend was definitely tomboy. She played football. The other one, we used to do martial arts. And so we were just girls that were always riding our bikes, going swimming and like climbing trees. And my friend liked animals. She used to collect tadpoles and things. You know, that kind of thing. We did that kind of thing when we were like 12, 13. And, you know, we weren't running around trying to sleep with boys, right? Let's put it that way. And then as time went on, things just became more and more unsafe. So like there was this boy who, I don't know why he picked on me. As I said, I was an easy target. I wrote an article about this in the Backbencher about how much of an easy target I was compared to my friends. They had, all of those girls had either an older brother or a dad who was probably paying attention, right? One didn't have a dad, but he had an older brother. The other ones had dads who were paying attention or older brothers. And if there was any hint of trouble, their dads would be calling up the other dads and there would be some kind of meeting and it would be sorted. My dad wasn't involved in that network because he was too busy in his own little world, even though he was kind of there, right? And so I was easy target. And this guy, he came up to me and he just started trying to bully me all the time. He literally was like, what are you doing? Come with me. And I'd be like, I'm not coming with you. And then he would do things like push me in the pond. And then, you know, just this young lad. And this young lad, that guy, well, actually, I think he was mixed race, but whatever. He just zoned in on me. And for years, I just literally had to just avoid him. So wherever I was, I had to like just make sure that I couldn't see him or he would see me, because he would just try and harass me or bully me or something, right? And then by the time I was about 15, so me and my friends, we used to hang out with some of the boys on my estate. We were just friends. And I think some of us had relationships with them eventually, but we were friends, okay? And so those boys used to come and visit us on their estate. And this young lad used to see us hanging out with them. And there was another guy who I went to primary school with when I moved around there, who was a bully, who was part of a gang in that area. He targeted us. So this young lad, by the time I was about 15, I was actually, I was having a relationship with another guy who was on the estate, same age as me. He was a white guy. He's like my first boyfriend, more or less. And he literally came up to me after years of kind of bullying me. He came up to me and he said, he went up to the guy and he went, "You're Natoya's going to be my girlfriend now, so yeah, you better hop on." And then this guy was like, "Oh, what do I do?" Because his friends were just, they were scared of him, and they knew what this guy was like. They knew that they could get stabbed. And he just literally, like, I started walking off, and I just went, "Yeah, I'm going to go home." And I went home, and this guy followed me, and he was trying to make conversation. So after years of bullying me for no reason really, he suddenly decided that he fancied me, and he started saying, "What's your star sign?" I think our star signs are probably suited. Like, obviously we're meant to be, you're going to come out with me next week or something. And I was just like, yeah, maybe. And then as soon as I got in my house, I had this neighbor who was a bit weird, who used to complain about kids all the time. And I don't know why this guy did this. It was the most random thing it was strange. We were walking in past his door, and I think we were talking loudly. And this guy came out of his house and he was like, "What are you doing making all this noise with this little fucking nigger?" And he was a bit racist, right? And I was like, "Are you talking to me?" And he was like, "I'm talking to him. What's he doing here? Why are you here?" And I was like, "I don't know, what are you talking about, mate?" Because this guy had complained. He was just this horrible neighbor who complained about everything all the time, and obviously hated living there. He complained about me a few times, even though he knew my dad. It was weird. And I was like, "I'm going upstairs to my house now. Bye-bye." And this young lad is like this gang member, and he's like, "What the fuck, mate? Are you just call me a nigger?" And he got his knife out and he stabbed him. And I was just like, "Okay, I'm going to my house." I didn't see anything. Bye. And then the police came, and the man told the police that I was a accomplice. And I was like, "No, that's a lie." Not very long after this incident, that man moved away. Thank fuck. After he spray painted our door as revenge. Anyway, I never grassed him up because I know better than that. And I think after that, I didn't see him for a while, but when I did see him, he used to give me this knowing nod, and he used to go, "All right," and then he left me alone. I was like praying. I was like, "Thank God for that." That's just one example of numerous other examples like this. And this other guy on the other estate, the one that I went to primary school with, again, one of his buds tried it on with me, and I rejected him, and I was called a snob or something and frigid. And so they decided to attack the other boys that we were friends with. And also he attacked me. I got a black eye. He came and punched me in the face. Things like that. Anyway, my point, I'm telling you all this, is that growing up in a multicultural council estate was not fun, especially being an easy target. Yeah. 1 second, my baby's woke up. Oh. Hey. Hello, little Miley. Oh gosh. Hey. 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 I think I need this. I just put this on to make sure that you didn't cause too many noises. But I won't do that because you're going to grab it. Are you going to grab it? What's going on here? Look at this. What's this? Is that a nice noise? Yeah, so I have to say, I think to myself, if I've grown up in, like, I don't know, Telford or somewhere, God knows what would have happened to me. It didn't, these gangs were, they definitely groomed girls, as in like they were the route into girls being groomed. They're not necessarily going to do it because they weren't grown-ass men, but the younger men, the older men that were controlling these gangs, these drug dealing gangs, 100% were doing that kind of thing. I know that for a fact. My friend did have a Turkish drug dealer boyfriend, who the Turks, the Cypriots, and some of these gangs, they were mostly black boys, Caribbean, whatever. They used to have like turf wars with them, and so my friend heard about this. Her boyfriend was kind of like, oh, what an excuse to kind of cause trouble with these guys. So that I know that there was a bit of something happened as a result of that. But also I had to distance myself from the Turks, because they it was kind of like, basically my friend's drug dealer boyfriend, his brother was like, hey, so me and you, and I was kind of like, yeah, not interested. And obviously, like, if they're going to go around being my kind of protector, then I obviously need to pay them back in some kind of way. And so at that point, I was just like, right, I have to just move on from this area, and I have to disassociate myself with these people. Oh. And that's what I did. And it just so happened that I went to sixth form college in a different area, and I was never around anymore after that. So, you got a bit of, what's that in my hair? That was I think that was a bit of apple that you were eating earlier because you were spitting it out, I think. Hey, is that nappy filled? No, it's all right. It's all right. It's all right. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to feed? Yeah, you do? You want to feed? You want to feed? You want to feed? This is supposed to be feed in baby sign language. But I'm not sure I've done it enough yet for him to understand. So, anyway, that was just basically, I just wanted to give you a context of the environment that I grew up in. So eventually I went to sixth form college and I moved on and I stopped hanging out with those people. And then as time went on, I decided I wanted to be a journalist. And, as much as I did my A-levels things, I was a people pleaser, and my mother was a pain in the ass. My dad got remarried to a Thai woman, and I didn't get along with her. And so, things weren't like particularly great, and I didn't have a lot of support in that way, and I scraped through. Yeah. I know that I could have done better, but I didn't. And I was always out socializing, and I had a part-time job, and and then I just went on to uni, but it wasn't a good uni. And I wanted to do journalism, but I did media and cultural studies with journalism as a degree, and it wasn't at the best uni, and I didn't have very good A-levels, and I wasn't particularly that focused. I was just sort of floating along with what society was promoting to me, really. At that point, I was starting to question things. So I remember studying feminism when I was younger and thinking that it was about women's choice. So, I thought it was about agency, right? Because mistakenly I thought that women had been denied agency. And in some ways they were, but not in the So, see, it in some ways the rules that were existed in the past existed for a reason, and you have to critically think about why they existed. It doesn't mean they should be enforced by the state, in my opinion, but they existed for a reason. So you have to explore what those reasons were. And I just thought it was about giving a woman, liberty and choice. And but then by the time I was at uni and I did that course, which is basically like Marxism 101, I remember reading patriarchy theory and going to all the classes, having to write a feminist analysis essay about absolutely everything. And I thought to myself, this doesn't make any sense, because I was already pretty red-pilled about domestic violence. I'd had many experiences with my own parents, and I'd seen it in other people, and I'd seen my friends had, relationships, and I'd seen all kinds of setups about domestic violence, and I saw women being as violent or more violent than men. I saw women who deliberately played the victim and who were, convenient victims when they felt like it, who were codependent, but also they used to switch roles. So sometimes they'd be codependent and sometimes they would be the perpetrator. I saw all kinds of different situations around me because, as I explained, I was in a fairly dysfunctional environment. And I just knew that the domestic violence narrative was bullshit. And so that already had me questioning things. And I was also someone that was always questioning things, always trying to look at both sides of the story. I think that my childhood really made me do that. And I was living with the secret of my dad's crimes for a while as well. That was particularly not very nice, and it really ate away at me. And my mum was a complete and utter fucking mess and emotionally abusive. And she tried to, when I was about 17, she tried to get me to move out and go in a council flat, a hostel, because that's one of the only ways you can get social housing these days, was to pretend you were homeless, and then they put you in a hostel for your age group, and then when you're 18 you're eligible to get council flat. And I refused, and she hated the fact that I refused. She called me a snob. She said I thought I was better than her. This is the same thing going on from before, as I told you. And I remember saying to her, if going through that process means I'm going to end up on a tower block like you did, I'm not doing it. She was like, but you could probably get somewhere nicer. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. And like, how are you going to support me? No. Like, also, she had 2 bedrooms. I used to stay at her house. And I remember thinking, why wouldn't I just be living with you? But remember, if you're on benefits and then someone else who's not on benefits comes and lives with you, you got to change things, right? So she, that wasn't really something that she necessarily wanted. I mean, she did want me to live with her. For years, she tried. For years, it was always like, when are you going to come and live with me? And I redecorated my bedroom there and stuff with her. But to be honest, I didn't want to live with her after spending years trying to deal with her madness. Because I used to say to her, look, my dad, I understand what you're coming, because she used to use my dad against me. So she used to say to me, your dad is a sex offender, and he doesn't care about you, and he's abusive and whatever. And I used to say, yeah, that's probably true, but you're also a fucking mess, and I don't want to live with you either, right? So by the time I moved out to go to university, I was kind of like, oh, fuck both you guys. That was kind of my in my head, because my dad had this new wife and she wasn't very nice. And I was just like, this whole thing is just neither of you take responsibility for your life. Neither of you have agency. It was always blaming everyone else all the time. Both of them had the same problem. They were always blaming everyone else for their problems. They both came from horrible, horrible childhoods. But instead of saying, okay, look, this is where the dysfunction is, and this is where my agency is, I'm going to stop using that as an excuse, and I'm going to work on developing my agency. No, they went completely the opposite, the both of them. Always, my dad's always was going on about how this person is their fault, government's fault, that's fault. Same with my mum, exactly the same, always. Never about them, always about someone else. You're doing a big poo. You did a poo in the last stream. The thing is, I think you always do a poo at this time of day, don't you? Yes. So, you know, it was extremely frustrating having these two people as my parents. And the thing was, my mum was her own worst enemy about my dad, because I agreed with her that my dad was not getting therapy and he'd offended again, and he was just existing, and he was a danger to society in this kind of way. And I agreed with her. And so that was kind of how I stayed in relationship with her, right? Because otherwise, eventually I probably would have just been like, I'll see you once a year, you know? But I felt guilty. She used to emotionally manipulate me. She used to be like, you protected your dad all this time. And, you know, it's not fair that they put you to live with him. And I remember at that time I didn't know that she stopped me from living with all my family members, but I found out eventually. And I just used to say to her, look, you haven't sorted your life out. Concentrate on sorting your life out. Concentrate on becoming a stable person, and maybe you'll get some respect from me, basically. And I think I was like, for years I used to go along with her crap, but I was still fairly straightforward with her. I think more so than a lot of people. A lot of people would be like, you know, basically just going along with whatever their mum wants all the time, right? Because they want to please them. And because they've been such a traumatic experience, they want that back again. And I kind of was like that. But then I was also kind of honest with her a lot, where I used to be like, look, you know, just concentrate on the future and the present and the future, not the past. Just concentrate on sorting yourself out. And for a while, when I went to uni, she was working on herself. And I had time for her then, because I was like, okay, I can see you're trying. So, you know, but eventually when I was at uni, she started to groom me to put a condition on the relationship. So by the time I was about 20, I really had to deal with the fact that I'd been hiding this secret about my dad for a long time. So I confronted him about it, and that was a horrible experience. And he tried to lie, but eventually he admitted his crimes. And I said to him, either you get therapy, or you know, I'm not interested in basically having a relationship with you, really, because you've committed this crime again. I don't know if you're doing it all the time. I don't know. And if you ever get caught, I'm not going to support you. So I put a condition on the relationship with my dad. And I guess my mum put a condition on the relationship with me, because she said to me, the only way that you can be have a relationship with me, and also I asked her if I could stay with her temporarily, right, at some point, and she was like, the only way that's going to happen is if you stop talking to your dad. And I was like, that's not going to happen, because, you know, I don't want to do that. And so, you know, that was it really. That was the nail in the coffin, or the first nail in the coffin. When I left uni, I was a mess, and it was 2009, 2008, 2009. The recession happened. I had a job lined up, and then the job in like as a PA in a media company, and they literally lost all their contracts, and then I was supposed to start at 2 months, and the job didn't exist anymore. I had another job that I was eyeing up. Again, something happened with that. Literally, all my friends that got jobs in the media got made redundant within the first 6 months. There was all this crap happening around me. And my dad, when I left my dad and I didn't get along with his wife, I basically said I don't want to come back. And they got another Thai woman to live in the spare room because she was Thai. So, and also I'd confronted him about what happened with him when I was 12. And so obviously he didn't want me around, quite clearly, because that wasn't very nice for him to have to deal with that. So that wasn't an option. And then when I went to say, can I live with you, Mum? She said, you have to stop talking to your dad, which I kind of was, but it wasn't really this whole, I'm still really close to him. But it was more like, how dare you try and do that? Like, you have got no leg to stand on. I will do whatever I please. I'm an adult. But that was the condition to live with her. So I didn't live with her. So I then went around. I did have a job and stuff, but I had an internship and a bar job, and I because the two jobs that I had sort of had lined up. So I was quite proactive, even though I spent 3 years fucking around. But the last year of uni, I got a 2-1, and I'd found a job for myself, and I'd actually been quite responsible, and that all fell through because of the recession. And so I had the biggest knock to my confidence. It was horrible. I just completely lost all confidence in myself, and I thought I wasn't going to get anywhere. And so I got this internship, and then I got a bar job, and I was in a lot of debt as well, which was another thing, which was just stupid, because the bank gives you like $1,000 or more in overdraft when you're a student, because they know you'll spend it. So I had that, even though I'd had a part-time job throughout uni, but I was just irresponsible. And also I had a long-term relationship with a guy, and that ended mainly because I was a mess, which I'll talk about another time because I'm already talking about too much here. He was a nice guy, but ultimately I was not in any state to be in a long-term relationship with anyone, although he was probably someone that would have helped me a lot if I'd have stayed with him. The irony. So I was on my own, and I was renting spare rooms off people I knew. So like my friend's brother, someone else's box room, whatever. Renting privately in London is just ridiculous. And I guess at some point I remember thinking to myself, why the fuck didn't I go and get a council flat like my mum told me to? But hey, eventually I got a job in the job centre because it seemed like the most logical thing to do at the time. It was kind of stable. It was good money. And I moved in to live with a friend close by to the job centre, and I paid off my debt. I paid off my overdraft and started saving up money. And so for 2 years I was doing that, and then I hated that job. I mean, I tried, but obviously working in job centre is not the most exciting thing to do, especially when you think you wanted to be a journalist, and then sort of had a crisis of confidence about being a journalist. And also before that, I've been questioning the fact that whether I wanted to be one anyway, because I recognised a lot of stuff going on in the media even back then. I thought that it wasn't going to be very well paid, and so I started thinking, what else can I do? Because obviously that's not going to help me when you're poor like I am and have no support. So I also thought I was a shit writer. There's just loads of things going on in my head and in reality that said I shouldn't do it. So eventually I was a civil servant, and knew that this wasn't going to be my future. I tried to work in DCMS and thought I could go and work in the press office or something eventually, but I became really depressed at that time. And it was kind of a mixture between knowing I didn't want to be a civil servant, but at the same time thinking maybe I could utilize the fact that I was a civil servant and getting a better job role within the civil service. I was also having therapy. So I started therapy, and then I kind of had a breakdown. And I was really depressed and I couldn't get out of bed for 3 months. So what I did was around that time I'd quit the job, and then I was also working in this nightclub venue and working in music events and stuff, because I was thinking, oh, this is what I could do. I could get out being a civil servant and then go and work in that industry, which, thinking about it now, probably not the best idea, because like I probably should have stayed being in a stable job for a while, but hey ho. I went on to work in events and for venues and stuff, and I just became really depressed. And I managed to do that for a while, and I had all these opportunities because I was really good at networking. I had some good people, to be honest. There were some good people around who would have just employed me, and I would have, it would have been fine. But I was just a complete mess, and I was getting therapy, but I was just not mature enough, or not mentally stable. Like I was just depressed, and it was like I was trying to maintain a way of being, and I couldn't be like that anymore. And so I would get depressed every now and then, and I couldn't maintain it. So even though I was paying my own way and I had jobs and things, I had many opportunities that I failed at. I had many. I used to create opportunities and then fuck them up. I was just for about, I don't know, like if I left uni when I was 22, between the age of like 20, and I was just civil servant until I was 24. So sort of overlapping it. 22, no, 23. No, I was civil servant until I was 20, 24, 25. 3 years. Yeah, 3 years. Then I sort of moved into this music events world, nightclubs and stuff. And I had, as I said, I could have been relatively successful in that world. Now I'm like, why the fuck would you do that? It was just nightclubbing all the time, drinking all the time, full on degeneracy. Okay, but interestingly enough, I was always quite clean. I never took drugs. I tried a few, but I hated being on drugs, and I knew lots of people around me that did. Hey. But I knew that if I did that stuff, I was going to mess myself up. So I never did. I just used to drink a lot. And I was very promiscuous, which I think goes with the territory. The good thing was that I did have therapy for 6 years, and I changed different therapists, and I did lots and lots and lots of online and books and things, learning my own development really. And so I would say that when I was at uni, I first started to question feminism, because I thought the patriarchy theory was bullshit. I left uni refusing to call myself a feminist, but still believing most of the feminist myths. Then as time went on, I started to read more stuff online, and I read The Myth of Male Power by Warren Farrell, and I met Erin Pizzey, which I'll talk about another time. Hey. Yes. So, I was also questioning socialism a lot. Hey, especially after working in the job centre, that really opened my eyes to the reality of the welfare state. Anyway, if you as someone like me who went through all of that, you have these full-on dysfunctional parents, and you don't really have much family, and then you start saying, hey, maybe socialism isn't the best way of going about things. It just like removes people's agency, and we should be encouraging them to have more agency, not less. And you have all these people around you who just don't want to embrace having full-on personal agency for themselves. You kind of need to distance yourself from them. And eventually I did with my mother. She's completely emotionally abusive anyway. But and now my dad is in prison, which, surprise, surprise, isn't a surprise to anyone, really. It wasn't a surprise to me. Surprise to some people around him who didn't know what he was. It was also coming to crunch time, because when I got pregnant with him, I said to him, look, are you still going to therapy? Because he did go to therapy for a while, especially after his marriage started to fail, which, surprise, surprise, not surprised. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, you're lying, basically. And then he committed again. Now he's in prison because he got caught. And I kept my promise. I said to him, you offended again and got caught. I told you I wasn't going to have anything to do with you if you did that. And there we go. He's in prison for 7 years. Hey. So why I chose to concentrate on feminism was that I've got numerous examples. I've told you some stories of toxic masculinity, of guys who are just scum, who I could have totally become a full-blown rad fan. I really could have. I mean, I've told you about my dad. I really, really could have. But I recognise that women have a choice, and they can recognise dysfunctional behaviour and red flags in people, and they have the power to say no, and they have the power to walk away, and they have the power to do something about it, especially these days. So there is absolutely no excuses. I think one of the issues that we don't recognise as society enough is abusive mothers and how they can hook in abusive men to make themselves look better, which is what I think my mum is guilty of. And I know this sounds weird, but if you talk to her about my dad, you would just get no accountability about her whatsoever. About the fact that she chased away all my relatives, and she acted like a complete nutcase, and just she's completely paranoid. Hey. I think that I've got to go and play with you now, haven't I? Yes. Yeah. You like kissing? Yeah. Got to change your nappy, haven't I? Yeah. Anyway, I've been talking for almost 2 hours, so I think I shut up now. But I just thought that it was important to put this out there. If you have any questions, give me a comment and I'll answer. And if you are a non-feminist or anti-feminist woman who'd like to meet other women and you'd like to increase agency in your life, because by the time I was 26, I was like, screw this, I want my own family. I cannot continue being this dysfunctional person going along with this prescribed view that society is giving me. I'm trying to develop agency within myself, and society is saying, "You're a woman. You're a victim of everything all the time. You must obey your parents." And it's like, no, I mustn't do any of that stuff. And you want to find more people like that, then join us at the Women's Liberation Network, and we'll be glad to have you. I'll put the link below the video. Yeah, I'd like to start doing some online stuff about that too, for people that can't come, but we'll get there eventually. Also, it's Women's Day on the 8th of March. We're going to be doing some stuff, but I'm not talking about that deliberately, all right? If you'd like to get involved and you're in London or near London and like to come, then send me a message. Tweet me at Ladies with Philip Davies Facebook page. Okay, or send me a comment. All right. Say bye-bye, Miley. I've spoke too much now. Say bye-bye.